And we're ready.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
Instead of welcome, because this is the first episode of one of our secret projects
It's also the first book episode that Rachel and I have done together.
on our book club podcast. You know what? It's fine. I don't need to
How
reconcile
long?
that.
9 months? And
To
this is the
be
first
fair, I
book
have
episode you've
been
done with
doing
me?
books. You're just a slow reader, and I can't wait for you.
You've been doing them with Kate.
I know. Well, now we're doing one with you, and not just doing any book. What book are we doing, Matthew?
And not just the book. This book is just the start.
Yeah.
This is Dune.
This is the tip of an iceberg that would not exist on Dune because there's not enough water.
Well, there is water. It's just hidden.
It's just hidden. So, yeah, we're going to be doing what we have decided to call a
Deep dive?
deep cut.
Deep cut?
I think the deep cut. This is Dune, the deep cut, which means we're not going to be just doing one episode. Oh, no. We're going to do the book. We're going to do the next 2 books. We're going to do every movie adaptation we can get our hands on, including the Sci-Fi miniseries. And we will be releasing these week by week, hopefully so the last episode coincides with the release of Dune Part 2 in theaters in November. So we read the book, and we just read the book. You just read the book. I just read the book. And that's what we're going to be talking about this time. And I'm guessing this is going to be at least 2 parts, because I don't know if you've seen this book in person, but it is a tome. And
It's a heckin' chonker.
There is
of
not
epic sci-fi.
There is not an inch of wasted text in this entire book. If you skimmed a paragraph, go back and read it. You missed something vital. I guarantee it. So first of all, I want to talk about how good of a writer Frank Herbert is.
Absolutely. His phrasing,
Yeah.
just the way of describing things, definitely stands out.
Yeah.
Even after this many years.
Some of it feels odd, like jarring, but at the same time, you know exactly what he's talking about. I think at one point he refers to the pastel distance. I looked off into the pastel distance. I've never heard like atmospheric distortion described as the pastel distance, but you get exactly what he's saying. Far enough away that the color has faded out of things. They've become pastel. And you're like, okay, I hear you, Frank Herbert. I know, I get it. And I would compare the depth of the world and the mythology and the complexity of the mythology that he created for this Dune series to The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
I think it is, if not close to, as large as. Maybe given more time, he would have created even more in the way that Tolkien created.
And I think the Herbert estate is in a very similar situation. There's a lot of parallels between the Herbert estate and the Tolkien estate.
Yeah.
Where you had this, patriarch that was just a prolific writer, this creator of this universe where these stories happen, produced a, fairly, I guess looking back in the grand scheme of things, they produced this initial series of books that ended up being a very small piece of the total history and mythology of that world. And posthumously, their children, grandchildren, or nephews or whatever have taken on a job, a career of sifting through just the piles of unpublished content,
Right.
and publishing more books.
Compared to what we consider a successful modern writer, both Tolkien and Frank Herbert wrote like nothing, like relatively few books.
Right.
If you look at Sarah J. Maas, which I've been doing with Kate, she's up to like over 10, maybe 12. She's got 3 ongoing series right now. She has put more words on the page for publication than Frank Herbert and Tolkien. But this is a good example of, this is not to disparage specifically Sarah J. Maas, but there is a difference between I am churning out content for consumption, and it's good, and it's readable, and it's enjoyable, and I am literally reshaping the face of the genre or creating my own. I don't know what sci-fi looked like before Dune, but I know it looks different after. And I don't know what sci-fi or what fantasy looked like before Tolkien, because we haven't done that deep cut yet. But I don't know what the fantasy looked like before Tolkien, but I know it looks different after.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Brandon Sanderson, Sarah J. Maas, some of the more prolific modern writers are reshaping the genre in the same way. And I think part of that is the sheer depth of Dune. I mean, you read this book and the book itself is like complex. It reads like a history book that's readable, like an interesting and enjoyable history book.
Right.
And you get the sense that there is massive amount of depth that we haven't even scratched the surface of.
Right. Even this tome is not disclosing the full depths of the world.
Right. That he probably could have kept going indefinitely, which is probably why Frank Herbert has so much to work with.
Right.
And I'm curious, we're only going to be covering the first 3 books in the deep cut. We're going to be doing Dune,
Children of Dune,
and Dune Messiah, because those are all the ones that have been adapted for television or movies. I think we should continue and read the last 3 afterwards, because I want to know how different Brian is as a writer than Frank. He has like the House Harkonnen, the House Atreides books. Right. And I want to know, is he as successful in the way he portrays the characters?
And is he emulating the writing style?
Right. So, we'll get there. But first of all, hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to the Strange and Beautiful Book Club Deep Cut.
Dune Edition.
Dune Edition. All right, so we have a lot to talk about.
Dune, Arrakis, Desert Podcast.
I think anybody who's seen the 1980s Dune, every time you saw that italicized in the first section of the book, all you could hear was Kyle Lachlan going, Dune, Arrakis, Desert Planet. Yeah. We're not going to talk about any of the movie adaptations right now.
Those will be separate podcast episodes.
This is specifically the book. And specifically, we're going to start on part 1 because the book is divided into 3 parts. And so we're going to talk about part 1. And part 1 is like baby Paul on Caladan, all the way to moving to Arrakis and the rebellion or the taking back of Arrakis by the Baron Harkonnen.
Book 1 is Dune. Book 2 is Muad'Dib. And book 3 is The Prophet.
Okay, so we're going to do book 1, Dune. And we start off with Paul. And Paul's on Caladan. And Caladan's like a water planet.
The opposite.
It's not like Waterworld, but it's like a lush.
It's like Earth.
Yeah, it's a lush planet. It has a variety of different ecosystems. It has rain. It has oceans. It has
large
lakes.
Oceans, yeah.
And they live, I don't know. I always see their home as the home from the 1987 Dune. Because
reading this book, so when I really get into reading, like I sit down, it takes me a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes to really get in. And then it really plays like a movie in my head as I'm reading, which experientially we've learned that lots of people work differently. Like Kate doesn't see pictures in her head. And that's something that we found out about her when Rachel and Kate would talk about the book. So
yeah,
I know this is a an experience that not everyone would share, but when during this reread of Dune, the scenes are playing out in my head.
Yeah.
And different, I guess I'd get specific scenes that the video in my head would be playing like that clip from the 1980s Dune.
Yeah, 1984. I said it wrong. I said 1987. Okay. It's 1984.
But then, when Paul does this thing, it's from the Sci-Fi miniseries.
Oh,
when
that's interesting.
like
because we've absorbed a lot of Dune content.
All the Stilgar scenes are Javier Bardem.
Of course.
Right?
I mean, fucking God. Javier Bardem.
Whew, I'm so
Anytime
excited.
Anytime I can insert him into a book.
The heavy Stilgar scenes in the next Dune movie.
Right.
I'm really excited to see Stilgar in there. But it's this like collage of all the film adaptations of Dune playing out in my mind's eye as I'm reading the book. And I was trying to make note of who are the prominent depictions of these characters and why am I calling up one depiction of a scene from the Sci-Fi miniseries of Paul doing something versus the 1984 Colin McLaughlin Paul.
Yeah.
Like when he says, "Your name is Usul, the strength at the base of the pillar."
Yeah, that's
it's
1984.
Kyle MacLachlan.
Yeah, straight. Yes.
Yeah.
Because they don't say that in the other ones.
Right.
So I think the reason that we get like a montage in the way you view it is because each different adaptation chose to focus on different things.
Right.
So the 1984 Dune, for a while, it follows the book, and then we veer off a little bit. And then the Sci-Fi miniseries is probably the most accurate. The one that covered the most, because they had 3 episodes to do it in.
Right.
And then I think, we haven't seen the full new Dune.
Yeah.
We've only seen part 1, so we don't know yet how they're gonna do Muad'Dib, how they're gonna do that section.
I think that's part of the inspiration for why we're going to go through the books.
Yeah.
And all of the film adaptations.
Right.
Because all the film adaptations do it slightly differently and they focus on different aspects of the story. They highlight or
focus?
Emphasize.
Yes.
They emphasize certain attributes of the story for that adaptation.
Right. And so the book starts really on Caladan. And it jumps us immediately. It just dumps us immediately into the lore.
Info dump.
I mean, it is, but it isn't, because we get like Bene Gesserit, we get Reverend Mother, we get the Gom Jabbar, we get immersed in the culture just immediately. And
this style of the like third person writing, where we are seeing snippets of almost every character's internal monologue.
Yeah, third person omniscient.
And I think that's why the like whispery voiceovers in the movie work so well, because
that's how it's written.
Yeah. Anyway,
because we start out, of course, with the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother has arrived on Caladan. And I think the reason I always view this scene in the 1984 set is because I think they best captured the like damp heaviness of like a night on a planet that's moisture laden.
Yeah.
And also the Reverend Lady Jessica is like phenomenally beautiful in the 1984 one. And I'm always like, oof. She also plays the lady in the web in Krull.
Yes.
She's just a very striking looking woman.
Okay, well, let's...
I'm sorry, I got off, but
I want to just try to set a precedent. The premise of this episode is
I know, but I was
the book,
just...
and we both keep going off to the film adaptations.
I had to finish
so
why. I had started why I always use that, and then you went off to talk about all the other stuff, which was fine, but then I wanted to finish my thought about it. I just felt like that captured it best. Okay. But this is really like we are introduced to the culture and also the mysticism right off the bat.
Yes.
And the fact that they have been scientifically advanced, it is the year 10,191. They have been spacefaring people for so long, they literally cannot conceive of anything else. And so not only is technology prevalent in the culture, but almost religion has been built around it, especially since we don't have computers, which I think was such an interesting choice, because instead of saying we have become so advanced, technology has become so advanced, here's how technology has taken over these aspects of our lives, there literally came a point where technology had advanced so far, humanity felt threatened by it. And we had the Butlerian jihad. And that is when humanity fought back against the machines and outlawed AI, outlawed computers. And that's why the Bene Gesserit and the Mentat function as like computers. They function as analytical machines.
Yes.
And I think it's really interesting that Frank Herbert picked up on the idea that a woman's interpretation of the way you would process data is far more intuitive, far more instinctual, far more about training awareness of yourself, training awareness of your body, training all of these internal functions to be able to function as like a computer. Right. Whereas the mentats are more, I am taking in all of this external data, I process it mathematically like a machine, and then I provide you with an assessment of the situation.
Right. And I think one of the reasons that works so well is there's this huge, precedent. There's this huge framework of like symbolic representations that are consistent, like across humanity, like across history, in human culture and stories, where you have separations between masculine and feminine that are distinct from like biologically male, biologically female.
Yeah.
And we use these structures in all of our storytelling and in like as they use in the book, a first approximation of like dealing with people, because narratives are how we learn to structure things in our like internal monologue that help us think about how other people do things and how things are going to unfold in real life and in stories. And so you like in this book world, he's set up this like the actual structures of the way their society operates have this clear-cut distinction between masculine concepts and feminine concepts, and the Bene Gesserit fulfill all of the cultural and narrative roles of feminine attributes, and the Mentats do a lot of the masculine stuff.
Yeah.
And they happen to be male and female, but as we learn with Paul, a male can like learn some of the feminine skills and roles, which is what the Kwisatz Haderach has to do.
Right. I think a lot of the main characters state, or it's implied, that they're trained in like the Bene Gesserit ways, or trained at least a little bit as a mentat.
Yes.
Because the Bene Gesserit, it's really just like hyper observation. The ability to just read the nuance in another person and know how to react to that.
Right. And both the Mentats and the Bene Gesserit their training is basically, what do they do it? In Altered Carbon, when they're talking about the envoy training, it's like total immersion, full absorb of all the details.
Yeah, and I don't think
and then you process it.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that concept comes from Dune. The idea
absolutely.
Of being able to so highly train a mind that it almost becomes superhuman.
Yes.
And that's what has been happening to Paul. And so the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother is there to test him, to find out whether he is a human or an animal.
Which is a very cool distinction to make.
Yes.
Like, there are levels in this society where you're a person, right? And
Right.
you go around feeling things and thinking things and doing things. But have you achieved the level of becoming a human as far as, like, you're a certified, like, agent that's trustworthy
Yeah.
to
Override your basic instinct. Yeah.
To progress the species in a good way, like for like long-term survival of the species.
Yeah. And also, the Bene Gesserits are enacting a program of eugenics, a selective breeding program, of which Paul is something of an aberration because Lady Jessica was not supposed to have a boy. She was supposed to have a girl.
As part of their plan.
Plan. But the Duke wanted a son, and she loves the Duke, so she gave him a son. And she kind of maybe thought that Paul could be the Kwisatz Haderach. But maybe also it was just because Duke Leto wanted a son. I don't know. Everybody's motives are so layered. Everyone's an onion. Everyone is an onion. There are layers and layers and layers to everything.
There are no
that's happening.
two-dimensional characters.
No. And this is, if anybody knows any scene from Dune, it's the box.
I think that's because it's such a prominent scene in the book.
Yeah.
And it's open to adaptation because, like, just if you're in the room,
right,
all that's happening is there's this old lady and this kid talking, and he puts his hand in a box, and then he starts looking uncomfortable, and then there's like screaming and exclaiming,
yeah,
and then he leaves.
Yeah, pain by nerve
induction. But the significance of what's happening is all internal experience.
Yep.
On both of their parts. And so it's so open to interpretation for like a filmmaker. It's like, oh, I can kind of do whatever I want. And so it's a big point of kind of exploration, experimentation.
And after that, after he passes the box test, we get a little bit of a taste of who Paul is, which is like he has prophetic dreams. He's trained in a lot of Bene Gesserit things. He's mildly trained in the voice, which he will need. She's like, for the father, nothing. And I love how we don't obfuscate what's happening. The only question is how it's going to happen. Because the Bene Gesserit mother is like, Reverend Mother. She's like, listen, you fucked up, Jessica. And because of that, we're not going to be able to seal the breach between Harkonnens and Atreides. And we very well may lose both bloodlines now.
Right. There was, as with everything, there's layers here.
Yeah.
One goal was to combine the bloodlines because that's part of their their plan to breed. What was it? I was looking through the glossary and they had some just explanation about the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah.
And
the one who can be in many places at once.
Well, they reference that the Bene Gesserit are aware of a place within themselves that they cannot look.
Yes.
And
a man could look there. Yeah.
I'm formulating.
It's fine. Formulate away. I'll sip my coffee.
So there's a place inside the Bene Gesserit that they recognize they cannot look.
It is terrifying to us.
And it's more of a like genetic limitation, like a capacity of their biology that limits them to looking in that place.
Yes.
So there's two places inside each person.
Mm-hmm.
Paul talks about it later. There's two places inside each person that they can look with the proper training.
Yeah, ancestral memory.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And one is masculine themed.
Yeah.
And one's feminine themed. And so the Bene Gesserit, because of their biological genetic abilities, capacities, whatever, the Bene Gesserit, like women, can look in the feminine side, and men who are trained can look in the masculine side, but they can't look in each other's.
Yes.
And Ben and Gesserit are like, well, geez, that's a problem. It would be beneficial for the species to have someone who can do both. So their breeding program is specific. It's not like they use the term eugenics, but it's not like an exclusionary thing like a lot of our historical stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about real life eugenics on this podcast. They're real. It's shitty. That's a whole other kettle of fish. Yeah.
Okay. So the goal of this eugenics program, this breeding program, is to bring about
selective breeding program.
To breed a person who has the biological capacities and ability to receive the right training to be able to access both sides.
Yes.
And maybe do more stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of their whole motivation for existence. Okay. So they have, the Bene Gesserit have this one plan, this selective breeding program to bring about the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yes.
But the other aspect of combining the Atreides and Harkonnen bloodlines has nothing to do with the bloodlines.
Yeah.
It's politics.
It's politics.
There's this long-standing feud between Harkonnen and Atreides, which, from a archetypal perspective, they are completely opposite.
Yeah.
They are opponents. And eventually, there will be another big battle between them. Right. There have been lots of fights between Harkonnen and Atreides, and they want to combine the houses, marry the houses together to avoid further large-scale conflicts. And there's probably business strategies involved in this long-term plan to combine the Harkonnen and Atreides.
Well, there's always layers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really it's just, if you guys kill each other off, we lose both of these bloodlines that we've been carefully manipulating for millennia. And if Lady Jessica had a daughter, that daughter could have been wed to one of the Harkonnen heirs, and it would have sealed the breach. But Lady Jessica didn't. And really, it is not just a feud. It is like a cultural feud level revenge thing called Conley, where they have vowed to destroy each other. They have vowed to enact revenge against each other for whatever slight initially caused it.
Canley, there's a very clear definition in the what is it, the charter? No, it's what's the name for the whole organization?
The Landsraad?
It's the Landsraad something. Starts with a C.
Chom?
I'm pulling up the glossary for Canley. It was in there. The convention.
Ah, yes.
So the convention is
formal feud or vendetta under the rules of the Great Convention, carried on according to the strictest limitations. Originally, the rules were designed to protect innocent bystanders.
Right. So it's a way that the two houses can basically vow to wipe each other out, but there are strict rules about how they can act against the other.
Right.
In a way that limits it to
limits collateral damage.
Limits collateral damage. Like you can basically only take out members of the royal family.
Right. And that's where they're at. The Harkonnen hate the Atreides hate the Harkonnen. They have for centuries. And now there's no way to fix it. And they're headed to Arrakis, Dune, desert planet, because they've been given the planet by the Emperor. Basically, the Emperor kicked the Harkonnens out and put the Atreides in power, because the Atreides have a reputation for efficiency and honor and just being generally
bringing about
good dudes.
The best in people, processes, society.
That's our surface level reason. also, Duke Leto is super popular in the Landsrod. So there's three. This is a tripod government. There's three things. So there's three segments of the government. There's the emperor, who is Shaddam IV, the 81st of his line. And there is the Landsrod, which is the collected group of oligarchs, basically. They're the people who own the planets, run the planets. They're the dukes, the barons, Yeah. And then there is the Spacing Guild, which I think is really interesting that one of the elements of this tripod government is effectively a company. And they are all not owned, but they all own stock in the CHOAM company. So if you want to talk late stage capitalism, this is capitalism that has advanced so far, it has literally become the way that everything is ruled.
Right. All commerce is centralized.
Yeah.
If you're going to do business, you're doing it through the CHOAM company.
Right. And if you want to talk about, like, we just watched RoboCop, where everything was becoming privatized. It was like a post-apocalyptic late stage capitalism. This is beyond late stage capitalism to where capitalism has become government, capitalism has become religion, capitalism has become everything.
The entire society.
Right. And it's so endemic in the system, it's not even seen as like a thing separate from anything anymore. It has become part of what everyone is doing.
Right. And the, like, basically positions on the board of directors of CHOAM are almost like hereditary.
Yes.
And it's like an analog for the houses, where basically the houses have all the directorships in CHOAM, and there's a lot of mixing. There's very little, like, clear separation of responsibilities.
Right. And then the emperor is he's the largest stockholder.
Yeah. He's the majority shareholder in CHOAM.
And CHOAM stands for Combine, Honet, Ober, Advancer, Mercantiles. Did that clear anything up?
Yeah,
no,
obviously.
No. There's
a lot of made up words.
This is the murkiest part of the book for me. He makes up a lot of words and you can roll with it. But CHOAM is clearly central to the plot, because a lot of this is about manipulating stock and shares. And Duke Leto has become too powerful. There's a chance that the Landsrod could give him enough shares that he becomes the majority stockholder and he unseats the emperor.
Right, and then he can take over the... So, the tripod...
This is clearly a major part of it, but it is not explained well enough. I mean, all due respect to Frank, but every time they mention CHOAM, I'm like, okay, I really have to envision it like that, like 1980s cutthroat boardroom that you saw in a lot of the movies, like in RoboCop, where everybody in the boardroom is out for more power and killing each other is not off the table.
Right.
And that's basically how you have to envision it. And so what the emperor is doing is maneuvering Duke Leto into a position where he can be eliminated. Because as long as he stays on Caladan, that's the ancestral seat of his power. Everyone accepts his right to rule over Caladan. And he does a good job. And there's literally nothing. He can't, stirring the pot won't do anything there.
And even from a, like, hostile takeover perspective.
Yeah.
He has the home field advantage. Like, just combat-wise.
Right.
Duke Leto is undefeatable.
Yes, on Caladan. Yes, he has the home turf advantage on Caladan. And so he's got to get him off. And what's the most attractive thing to get him off of this planet is Arrakis, because Arrakis is the richest planet in the Great Convention. And it's the richest, but also the most barren, because it has one resource that everybody wants, and that is the spice. And the spice is like a consciousness expanding drug that anyone can take. And the longer you take it, the more your consciousness remains expanded.
But then the more you need to keep taking.
But yes, but the more addicted you get to it, the more you need to take to get the same effect. And then the more your body becomes dependent on taking it, which Frank describes it as the geriatric spice.
And that really, like, undermines it.
Frank, did you look up that word? geriatric, did it mean something different in the 1960s when you wrote this book? Because all I hear when you say that is old people spice. Old Spice, one might say.
Maybe this is all just a play on, on Old Spice.
I think it's because it expands life. It extends life and expands
consciousness. It keeps you healthy longer.
Yeah.
So, yes, it would be attractive for elderly people to, like, basically as a, like, longevity medication.
Yeah.
And a life extension, whatever, to keep you functional longer later into life.
Right. I mean, okay, I don't know how else you would say that, but I certainly wouldn't use geriatric.
But that's like the smallest piece of what the spice does.
Well, it's like every once in a while he just couldn't think of something, so he put in a placeholder word, and then he never got around to changing it. Like Paul. Everybody else is Leto, Fenrig, Gurney, Twofer, and then he's Paul. And also Duncan, Idaho. Maybe Duncan, Idaho is the most exotic sounding name to them because it's the most.
Yeah, Paul would probably be an exotic name in this universe.
I guess. But all of this is to say, Leto's going to Arrakis. He doesn't have a choice. He's been gifted Arrakis. To turn it down would infuriate the Emperor. So even though he knows it's a trap, he's got to go.
Right. I think because of, like, there's the, like, imperial authority over the houses of the Landsraad. And then there's the, like, Atreides is beholden to, or has responsibilities to Chom.
Yeah.
And Shaddam is the majority shareholder in Chom.
Yeah.
So from two directions,
Shaddam
gives him a command that he has to obey.
Yeah, even knowing that this is likely going to kill him, he has to go. And the best thing he can do is just prepare as well as possible. And this is the most chess-moving part of the whole first section, because we're learning all the pieces. Because we've got Duke Leto, who is a good commander. He knows his people. He works really hard. We drive that home really heavily. We have Gurney Hallock, who is my favorite character in this book. I think I read part of the first book at some point, but it's been a long time, and I certainly didn't read the whole thing. And I had totally forgotten that Gurney speaks in, like, made-up quotations. And he plays music, and he's, like, a badass. So he's the total package. Of course he was played by Sir Patrick Stewart. Right. In the 1984 version. Who else would you choose to deliver these dramatic, almost Shakespearean lines? And they rely on him to do it. They're like, okay, Gurney man, let's get a quote for this moment. And he's always got one.
Right, and it usually provides some kind of insight that, like, the Duke wasn't quite getting. And he's like,
yes,
Gurney, you hit the
or
nail on the
head. Or it's a commentary.
Yeah.
Like, a subtle commentary on a decision he thinks is a wrong decision. And then we have Twofer Hawat, who Twofer Hawat is the Mentat. And he's been their Mentat for like 3 generations. How old is Twofer Hawat? But they drink that spice liquor. They drink the Mentats. Yeah, the juice of Sefu or whatever. And they mention that they have like lip stains from it because that's how they imbibe.
Sappho-colored lips.
Yeah, and that's how they absorb the spice. Because the Mentats use spice to expand their consciousness to the point where they can function like an analytical computer. And then we have Duncan, Idaho, which Duncan, Idaho and Gurney Hallock are really Paul's fighting instructors. Gurney's more high level. He's more like, here's strategy, here's how to fight specific opponents. And then Duncan, Idaho is more like hand-to-hand combat. Here's your knife, here's your sword, here's all these weapons, here's how to fight with them. And that's really our players, besides Lady Jessica and Paul, those are really our players in the Atreides arena. And you can see how the Duke Leto has a large group of trusted people, including Dr. Yui. And I I don't know how I feel about the fact that we know Dr. Yui is the traitor, like, immediately.
It's a very interesting strategy. Like, it's a bold strategy.
Yeah.
To reveal, like, in the captions at the top of each chapter.
Right.
Which, that's a...
I like those.
It's like
the little
the
exposition
multi-layered
things at the top.
ways
Yeah.
of telling the story and implying, like, the expansiveness of this universe is, like, starting chapter 1, you have quotations, and it's the attribution on the quote is like, from this book about, Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, or whatever, by the Princess Irulan. So we know from the very beginning, okay, Princess Irulan, who is she?
Yeah.
Don't know. But she's going to be writing books, a plethora of books about Paul Atreides.
Yeah.
Providing, basically a info dump, like little snippets of info dumps.
Exposition. Like the voiceover at the beginning of a movie, but better.
Right.
And we also know from the very beginning that Paul is going to win.
Yep.
Yeah, because we have these little quotations. The only thing we don't know is how. Frank really never leaves us in suspense.
Right. You always know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
Like, you get one detail, like, okay, Paul is going to become the emperor.
Yeah.
But you don't know any of the other side effects of the path that it took to get there, other than, for this specific thing, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
And what's left to maintain the suspense is, how is he going to do it, and what are the other consequences of the choices he has to make to get there.
Yes. Yes.
So it really, like, from the very beginning, the primary way that this story is told is focusing on the journey, not the destination.
Yes. Yeah, because you know where you're going.
Yeah.
You always know where you're going. But the joy is in, holy shit, how are we going to manipulate all these pieces to get there? Because we also have the Baron Harkonnen. Harkonnen. Different places pronounce it differently. It's made up, so it's fine. Baron Harkonnen. And the Baron Harkonnen is on Gedi Prime. And as lush and as beautiful and as wild as Caladan is, Gedi Prime is like a thin veneer of civilization over filth. That's how
depression.
Depression. That's how everybody describes it. That, at that one point they have the birthday celebration, or the celebration for Fade, and Count Fenrig goes to Gedi Prime, and he's like, oh yeah, everything here has been cleaned up, but once we get outside the radius, it's all slums and filth, and just the idea that the Baron Harkonnen is not a bad leader, and not a good leader. And we come at how nasty the Baron Harkonnen is in a lot of really interesting, and I don't know how well they have aged, directions. One is he is morbidly obese. Yep. And goddamn if we don't mention that every single time this guy pops up. His baby fat cheeks, the fact that he's hungry all the time. I mean...
And his complete negligence of, like, physical exercise.
Right, he wears suspensors. He wears...
like anti-gravity.
Yeah, so that he doesn't
devices.
have to support his own weight, which is a little bit metaphorical.
Oh, it's a lot of it metaphorical.
And he also enjoys the company of young boys.
And he always kills them afterward.
Yes. He especially likes one that look like Paul or look like his nephew Fade, which he never mentions. I mean, I don't know that this is redemptive in any stretch of the imagination, but he never touches Fade, and he never actually tries to get Paul.
Right. I think that's part of the... Okay, so we said every character is an onion.
Yeah.
There's no two-dimensional characters here.
Right.
the Baron Harkonnen is the closest thing to a two-dimensional character, but throughout the book, we very subtly expose his layers, because for certain things, he is very good at controlling his urges, his impulses.
Yeah.
Like for Fade, it's like, so he has this idea of his legacy. The Baron has this idea of his legacy, and he works really hard to maintain his barony.
Yeah.
Whatever his
fiefdom.
His fiefdom. Mm-hmm. And he's always been intending to pass it on.
Yeah.
To an heir.
Yeah, to the Na Baron.
The Na Baron.
Yes.
And so he really cultivates Fade as a successor, and part of that dedication to his legacy and his successor is he's not going to damage or traumatize his successor because of his selfish compulsions.
Yeah.
And so he finds ways to like trick himself into feeling like he's satisfied this compulsion to do whatever. Yeah. But he never once compromises on maintaining the integrity of Fade.
I mean, he has a line. Is it a great line? Not a great line, but it's a line.
Yeah.
And this is just to make him seem villainous. He's given villainous compulsions because that makes us see him as villainous. It's to erase any amount of sympathy that the reader might have for the Baron. Because oftentimes he is framed as being like the scapegoat for the Emperor and for the Landsrod. Because he
has a reputation for being super hedonistic.
Yeah,
and impulsive.
He's the smelly guy at work. That's a really nasty way to say it too, but he's the fellow that like it just is not everybody's cup of tea and is really nobody's cup of tea, but he's the smartest guy in the room. So he has continually compensated for his own failings by manipulating the world around him to his benefit. If he can't win it just by being a good dude, he's going to win it by being smarter than everybody else.
Right. And this really feels like the person who's... So, to make a distinction between talent and skill.
Yeah.
I would say the Baron has like massive talent, but he hasn't practiced the discipline of refining that into a skill, into a finely tuned skill.
Yeah.
Whereas Leto, the Duke, I guess I don't know if any of the other houses use the titles Duke.
We don't really talk about all the other houses. There's like minor houses and major houses, and then we have the Emperor, we have the Duke, we have the Baron, and we have the Count. So Count Fenrig. But we don't talk about anybody else enough to give them a honorific.
And I think we pick different titles for different houses so that there's no ambiguity. If you say the Duke, there's no other Dukes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Baron has massive talent, but hasn't
refined it into a skill.
And the Duke has like moderate talent, but like his shtick is he refines everything.
Well, he also surrounds himself with people that compensate for his failings, whereas the only one that the Baron really has is Piter.
And even Piter, he has corrupted.
Right. Well, Piter, I think, was a little bit...
Well, yeah. Piter was probably a little bit
He was already
off.
sliding down the slope, and I think the Baron Harkonnen just gave him a little push. And so he is our psychopath mentat.
Right. And,
who is thoroughly obsessed with the Lady Jessica and is doing most of this so that he has the opportunity to have the Lady Jessica.
Right.
Which is
have
why...
in a possessive way.
Right. Yes. And which is why I think it's interesting we never talk about the Baron Harkonnen even attempting to be with Paul, because he's allowing Piter to manipulate all of this so that he could, quote, have the chance to be with Lady Jessica. He could easily have added in, and I get Paul. But one of the things in this world is the Emperor has a truthsayer who knows if you're telling the truth or if you're lying. Absolutely. With 100% accuracy. And so you have to be able to maintain the moral high ground. You have to be able to tell the truth to the Emperor. So he cannot compromise even a small amount, because if he does, it will all fall.
You can't just maintain plausible deniability. You have to maintain actual deniability.
Yes. And so all of those people on the Atreides side all bundle into a spaceship, and we travel to Arrakis. We travel to Arrakis. And really, we kind of undercurrent to everything is how powerful the Spacing Guild is. And the fact that as powerful as the Landsrod and the Emperor think they are completely dependent on the Spacing Guild for travel. And that makes the Spacing Guild the most powerful force in the universe.
But they don't exercise that power.
Right.
In a heavy-handed way.
They just have
It's all behind the scenes.
It's all behind
Everybody
the scenes.
has guildsmen advisors.
Yeah.
Except for Leto.
Yes. Except for Leto, because he doesn't trust the guild. And I thought it was interesting that when they're on the spaceship, everybody gets in their spaceship. And once you're in the massive thing that the Highliner that they actually transport, you aren't allowed to get out. They're not allowed to mix, because you don't know if people that you have a feud with might be on another ship also traveling with you. So they can't risk conflict.
Right. So part of the contract with the guild is you maintain neutrality when you're on the Highliner. And if you don't, well, no more contracts for you.
Yeah, no more space travel for you. And all space travel is done by what they call the navigators. And in the book, we don't get a description of the navigators at all. Just that they're mysterious. They've been changed by the spice to the point where they no longer look human, but we don't know what they do look like.
Right.
Which I think is interesting, because every film adaptation has come up with their own, maybe this is what they look like. But that's completely plucked out of thin air, because
it's all speculation.
It's all speculation.
Right. It's a gap in the world that the director, the whatever, can fill in with whatever they want.
Yeah.
That they think will look cool.
Right. And I like the technology that we do include. I'm specifically referencing the Orange Catholic Bible that the
the OC used, Bible.
The OCB. That why Orange Catholic? It's like,
I think he wants to reference some of our current cultural context on so to say it's a Bible, a Catholic Bible, conveys a lot of historical context and meaning and significance to, it makes the contents of that predictable rather than making up a whole new religious text. He could say, the readers are on Earth in the 20th or 21st century.
Yes.
They're going to know what the Catholic Church is. They're going to have some idea of the kinds of stories in the Christian Bible.
Right.
And there's a lot of significant mythological narratives in the Bible that have a lot of cultural relevance.
Yeah, we also
to be able to borrow that for this story that's not on Earth, is not our culture, is really useful to connect the reader to this whole universe.
Yeah, and we also have to put on our context lenses for Frank Herbert. He's writing this in the 60s. He's writing this right on the cusp of like the global awareness of global religion that is the cult and religious explosion of the late 60s and early 70s, where these people are finally becoming aware of all of these other cultures. This insular world that existed in the 40s and 50s is gone. And now people are starting to think holistically about religion. It doesn't last long, obviously, but in the late 60s and early 70s, there's this mysticism, this burgeoning amount of, it's why you get Heaven's Gate. It's why you get Charlie Manson. It's why you get the explosion of cults and cult leaders in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, because, you know, you're getting Hare Krishna, you're getting all of these, maybe we can kind of come up with our own religion.
Right.
And with that comes an awareness of just the plethora of religious experiences in the world. And so I think Frank was trying to reconcile that into, if this is how we feel now, what happens when this has become so accepted that all religions sort of meld into one sense of mysticism? And in his glossary, he defines the Orange Catholic Bible as the, quote, accumulated book, the religious text produced by the Commission of Ecumenical Translators. It contains elements of the most ancient religions, including Mahomet Sari, Mahayana Christianity, Sen Sunni Catholicism, and Buddhist Islamic traditions. Its supreme commandment is considered to be, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul."
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I think for that section, at least, for the way that mysticism plays kind of a prevalent but not overt part, is really an outgrowth of what the culture would have felt like in the late 60s, early 70s in America. And I think if you just consider that as part of it, a lot of this starts to make sense. And so he gets the Orange Catholic Bible, which there's all these prophecies. I love how there's prophecies, but again, underneath of it all is the knowledge that the Bene Gesserit create everything. Prophecies to fuck with people. They have the Missionaria Protectiva, and their entire purpose is to seed prophecy into all cultures. Because if there's one thing Frank Herbert loves, it's a long-term plan.
He's always playing the long game.
Right. He's always planting trees under whose shade he's never going to sit. And that's everybody in his book, too. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of people have been working towards this final goal. Centuries of Bene Gesserit have been working for the Kwisatz Haderach. Centuries of Bene Gesserit have been seeding cultures with prophecy, with mysticism, with religion. So if they ever need to use them, they just have to show up, fulfill a couple of prophecies.
And then they have authority in that society.
Ding. Yeah. Now I'm your prophet, bitch.
Because not only are the Bene Gesserit manipulating bloodlines,
right,
they are behind the scenes pulling all the levers,
right,
to kind of keep the entire societal structure stable long enough to get to the kind of people that can do that on their own.
Right. And it's sort of like in our culture today, how many Christians believe that Jesus will be back. So the only thing someone would need to do to take power over a large amount of the population would be to claim they're Jesus, perform a couple of believable miracles, and that's it, dunzo. You've become the prophet, the leader of most people who identify as Christian. And that's the model he's going after. That's what the Missionary Protectiva does.
Right.
Yeah. So we arrive on Arrakis, and chess has continued. But this isn't just a chessboard. This is like chess in Star Trek, where you have like 5 levels, and you're moving the pieces up and down.
Yeah. What do they call it? Pyramidal chess?
Yeah. Oh, this is next level political maneuvering, because the Harkonnens are trying to cast suspicion on Lady Jessica. Lady Jessica clearly is innocent in this whole situation, but Duke Leto is allowing everyone to believe that he suspects Lady Jessica because he doesn't want the Harkonnens to know that he doesn't suspect Lady Jessica. And the only person he tells that he doesn't actually think his mom is the bad guy is Paul, because that way if something happens to him, Paul will be able to tell Jessica later that Duke Leto never suspected her.
Which, props to, like, making these characters believable.
Yeah.
Like, you have the smart guy who's like super honorable, but also really good at tactics.
Yeah.
To say, okay, yes, my, information, my spy master.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely we need to work this deception, but I'm not only a great leader and great tactician, I'm also a great lover of my significant other.
Yeah.
And I would never want her to fall to this deception if something were to happen to me before I could disclose this whole operation, this whole scheme to maintain this deception.
Right.
To be able to catch, the actual Harkonnen spies, influencers, whatever. And so he's like, I'm going to pick one person. The person I trust the most.
Yeah.
To pass this message to Jessica. And that really just reinforces the depth of the Duke being just all around a good person who's also very conscientious.
Yeah.
He's taking care of all the edge cases.
Right. And if you want to talk about plans within plans within plans, let's pause a moment and discuss the dinner party. The dinner party is a masterclass in juggling what I think is probably about 10 characters, all talking, but not talking about what they're actually saying. And multiple plots are all happening. Multiple plans are happening. In the middle of it, an extra plan comes in, and the Duke has to leave for a second and then come back. And by the end of it, it's exhausting to have read it. I cannot imagine what it would be like to have written it.
Any other scene like this in any other book I've read where you have like a large group trying to have complicated and complex conversations, they don't work.
No.
It kind of works out to be a mess, and it just feels like overly diplomatic, bureaucratic storytelling.
Right.
But this one, I feel like this book, it's broken up into the 3 sections. I feel like the first section, the reader is kind of almost pushed through the narrative.
Yeah.
And then the second and third sections, you're getting led along.
Yeah.
And so you're getting pushed through all of this stuff because you have to get through so much backstory and like world building context.
Right.
For you to actually like not get overwhelmed by the book. But given that you have this room full of like actual multi-layered characters.
Yeah.
And there's all these gambits and deceptions going on, and it's fun.
Yeah. Yes, because it's a lot. I can't even describe all the things that are happening, because there's like smugglers, there's guildsmen, there's someone's there to seduce Paul, but Paul knows she's there to seduce him, and there's all this stuff happening.
And Lady Jessica's like, oh, I'm not worried about that because that was included in Paul's training.
Yeah, it's fine. Paul's going to be fine. And we even continue the theme of the 1980s boardroom where everybody's trying to kill each other to get ahead, because there's a poison snooper in every room. Because at any moment, somebody might be trying to kill you. In fact, somebody's already tried to kill Paul, because we had the little hunter seeker that tried to kill him. They tried to take the life of my son. And not only are we listening to what they're saying, we are getting in the head thoughts from most of the principal characters during this entire dinner scene.
Right. You get the most informative, contextual inner monologue.
Yeah.
To clarify something, either to like close off a line of speculation, like when Paul realizes, oh, like she's here, or Jessica realizes, oh, this, prattering airhead is not actually, it's an act.
Yeah.
And
what is she actually trying to do?
She's trying to seduce Paul.
She's actually trying to do.
And so then when she's like, oh, this girl's trying to seduce Paul, you could think, uh-oh, like, is that going to be the direction this goes? Is she going to get Paul, like, alone in a room and then try to kill him? Like, is this just going to be a series of attempts on Paul's life? But then, like, right when you start thinking of, like, possible plot lines for this seduction attempt to go down, we close it off with, oh, no, that, the whole sex thing was not withheld from Paul's training.
Yeah. Honeypot ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
And then Leto leaves, Paul ends up taking over the table, and then it ends up with another layer because they're all trying to be like, oh, he's just a 15-year-old boy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And so Paul is speaking, but he's actually saying things that are very as layered in meaning, because if there's anything this whole culture reveres, it's manipulation. It's subterfuge. That's the word I was looking for. They really value being able to use subterfuge. And I think this is driven mostly by the fact that you cannot lie. So you have to manipulate everything onto a course where it does it itself, because you have to be able to say, oh, well, I didn't do it.
Right. And
that wasn't me.
All the great leaders have a Bene Gesserit advisor.
Yeah.
And the Bene Gesserit advisors are all trained to a certain degree, or at least have an ability to discern lies.
Right.
So when you're interacting with the leaders and their Bene Gesserit advisor is there, you have to speak technically true things.
Yes. Yes. And the fact that he invented that for this book and then carried it through the whole book is laudable. And we also get a sense in the first section. I think part of what we're doing in the first section is really setting up the themes for our characters that will follow through all the way through the book. So when we first meet the Lady Jessica, she seems infallible. And by the time we get to Arrakis, you realize she's bullshitting half the time. She's just really good at bullshitting. Because like when she meets the Shadow Mapes, and the Shadow Mapes is literally trying to like suss out, are you the one?
She's there to provoke the prophetic actions.
Right, but Jessica doesn't know what particular prophecy the Missionary Protectiva has seeded here. So she has to tread tiny little steps to get the Shadow to give her enough clues to tell her what she needs to be doing.
Yeah, and without the internal monologue of Jessica during these scenes, if it was just a description of what they're doing and saying, then you'd miss out on how much she's really just feeling her way through.
Yeah, she's like, okay, so this word came from this language. This language has these primary beliefs, so she's probably trying to get me to do this.
Right, and I know that the pattern of these mythologies, these prophecies, is this kind of thing. And so it really exposes the depth and breadth of training that a Bene Gesserit has to complete to be like released into the world as a legit Bene Gesserit.
And she also has the adab, which you mentioned, which it's really fascinating that we include the idea of ancestral memory. For Paul, it becomes a very real, very alive thing. He refers to it as his terrible purpose. And Lady Jessica refers to it as adab, which is like, I have a flash, a moment of inspiration. I don't know where it came from, but I know exactly what I need to do in this moment. And it's like, I literally have because of my genetic heritage and because I am able to commune with my body and with my body's knowledge on such a deep level, I am capable of accessing a wealth of wisdom and expertise that are not mine. And I'm not always consciously aware that I'm doing it, but I can access all of the wisdom of my ancestors in a flash of inspiration, which is probably part of what they're trying to get with the selective breeding. Is if you bring together enough wisdom and ancestral knowledge, you should be able to create someone who has the fullness of awareness to be able to access both the feminine and the masculine.
And a fullness, or at least a comprehensive set of ancestral lines that solved different kinds of problems, or had the right range of experiences.
Right. Yes. And as we move through this section, there is really an awareness of the danger that they're in and the inevitability of it, and the unavoidability of what was happening, what happens to them ultimately. And I think the only thing that really surprises anybody in this section is the level of involvement that the Emperor has in what the Harkonnens do. Because the Harkonnens, it was never a question. They were getting Dune back. They were going to get Arrakis back. They just needed Leto there. Then the Baron Harkonnen, because he's the smartest guy in the room, he does exactly what he wants to have done. It all falls into place perfectly. And he maintains the moral high ground. He maintains actual deniability, everything that's required of him, and it's done. I mean, he broke Dr. Yueh, because Dr. Yueh's our traitor, and he has what is called
Imperial conditioning.
Imperial conditioning. He's from the
Sook School of Medicine.
The Sook School. And so he has like a diamond tattooed on his forehead. And so anybody who's gone through this conditioning is completely trustworthy, which is something you need in a world where people will literally kill you at any moment. Everyone around you is trying to kill you. Sometimes even your best friend is trying to kill you. So you just have to have someone you can trust completely is invaluable.
Right.
And Baron Harkonnen is skilled at the thing that this society values the most, which is manipulation and subterfuge. And so he is able to break Dr. Yueh by taking his wife and using his love for his wife against him, which it makes me wonder, this is a little tiny nitpick. If you're going to create something like the Sook School of Conditioning, you should be aware of the fact that attachment represents a weakness. It represents a lever that somebody could use to break the conditioning. And so wouldn't you encourage anyone that goes through the conditioning to not form emotional attachments in this way? Because that would represent divided loyalty. Mm-hmm. And you can't have divided loyalty and be completely trustworthy. I do like the moment where Dr. Yueh he's sitting and thinking because he's conflicted about what he's about to do. He's going to do it, but he's like not happy about it. And so he's thinking about his wife, who was a Bene Gesserit. And he's like, hang on. The Bene Gesserit don't usually make mistakes. And she never gave me a child, because the Bene Gesserit are so in control of their bodies. They are in control of whether or not they conceive. And so even though they were married, they never produced a child. And he's like, did she know she was going to get captured?
Is this all another long game?
Yeah.
That the Bene Gesserit were playing?
Because you never know with the Bene Gesserit. Was this their plan all along? That she be used against me so that I could be complicit in taking down the House Atreides? No, she
put him through some of the Bene Gesserit training.
Right. Yep. Just something to think about. We don't revisit it because Dr. Yueh dies immediately. In fact, by the end of part 1, the house is completely broken up. So the circle of trust that Duke Leto had built really just falls apart. Because as soon as Dr. Yueh... Because what Dr. Yueh does is he turns off everything. He turns off the shields, he turns off the defense grid, and just lets everybody in. Right as the Duke is going to go tell the Lady Jessica everything about how it was a lie, that he didn't really suspect her. And he's like, I should have just told her from the beginning. I'm going to go tell her right now. And he hears a noise. And when he goes down there, he gets like trank darted.
Yeah.
And they trade out his tooth, which I do like in the book, how it's already a fake tooth. He just takes the fake tooth out, puts a new fake tooth in, as opposed to some of the movie adaptations where we graphically rip out his tooth.
Yeah.
Ugh. The tooth. The tooth. It's the tooth that has like a cyanide pill in it, or like a cyanide gas.
It has a poison gas.
A poison gas. Because they're very good at poisons, as a society that values subterfuge would be. And I did like that in the book, the battle is kind of in the background. That's usually my least favorite part of any of the adaptations, is this big battle where the Harkonnen and Sardaukar dressed as Harkonnen destroy the entire House Atreides as much as possible to the last man. And, you know, Dr. Yui gets taken to the Baron Harkonnen, and he finds out his wife is dead, which he had guessed. He's like, yeah, I already freed her. She's free now. She gets to be dead, I guess. No longer.
And you get to join her in death.
And you get to join her. You get to go be with her now. Here you go. Just shoots him. Yeah. This part is all very, like, a lot happens right here. We have been playing this chess, and now it's finally chess endgame. Gurney Hallock and Toofer Howat and Duncan Idaho, like, there's nothing, no arrangements for them, so we don't really know what's happening. We kind of know because Dr. Yui told Duncan to get a thopter.
Right. Dr. Yui did as much as he could to mitigate the fallout.
Yeah.
For the Atreides, like, family.
For Paul and Jessica.
Because he was so devoted to the family.
Right. And so he gets a thopter together for them, and the people that take them up, they're able to overpower, and, you know, they have the supplies they need, blah, blah, blah. I mean,
it just reinforces and gives us some more context on what kind of training and abilities does Jessica have, and what has she taught Paul and helped Paul cultivate.
Yeah, I did like that in the book they described the voice, the Bene Gesserit voice, as you have to take the measure of a person. Yes. It's not one size fits all. They need to talk to you enough that you get their speech patterns down, that you can use a tailor-made voice to influence them. This is the most action-y, least nuance-y part of the book, is this whole segment where the fruition of the Harkonnen plans and the fall of House Atreides. This is the most like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and that's how Paul and Jessica ended up crashed in the desert. Ding, ding, ding. I mean, it's good. It's a lot. I mean, since so much up to this point had been dialogue and subtle manipulation and step forward and step back and step sideways, when we get to this part, it's almost a relief. It's like, oh, stuff's happening. Like, actual things are happening. And they end up crashing, and Duncan Idaho finds them. And he tries to maintain a certain amount of suspense, because he'll be like, oh, and then a thopter came over the ridge. And then we cut to the Baron Harkonnen. And the Baron Harkonnen's talking about how they're using, like, bombs, basically, to collapse tunnel entrances to seal in the Atreides. Every house has atomics, which I think is really interesting. Every house has, like, a collection
mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, they all have, like, inherited nuclear weapons that they just have. And there's an agreement that they will never use them, but they all have to have them.
Yeah.
They all have to have them. And they also have laser guns, which is the most 60s way of saying, like, a laser pistol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's cool that he builds limitations into their technologies.
Yeah.
So the shields aren't infallible shields, because a laser gun will
blow it up,
destroy it.
Yeah.
And it also destroys the laser gun.
Right.
So, like, the two most powerful pieces of offensive and defensive technology are mutually destructive.
Right. You can't use a laser gun against somebody in a shield because you'll both die. And everybody has shields. Everybody relies on shields. Everybody wears shield generators all the time because you are never safe. You are never safe. in their society.
Right. And the shields protect you completely from, like, being stabbed quickly.
Yeah. The slow blade penetrates the shield.
And from projectile weapons.
Yeah.
And the mutually assured destruction of wearing the shield protects you from getting shot with a laser gun.
Right.
Which I can imagine making a laser gun that you just, like, set up almost like a tripwire and just leave it.
Yeah. I mean, what we're getting at here is open warfare is rare.
Right.
Open warfare is not something that happens all the time.
The actual destructive methods have advanced to the point where it's not feasible or reasonable to use them.
Right.
And so that's why it's novel when the Harkonnens use actual explosives to trap the Atreides fighters in the caves.
Yes. And so from here, you know, Duncan Idaho finds them. They go meet Liette because we've been hearing rumblings of Liette through this entire book. Liette, they don't know if it's a religious figure, if it's a mythological figure, if it's an actual leader, who Liette is. Because one of the things that Duke Leto is really harping on is on Caladan, they could rule by water and air. But on Arrakis, they need desert power. And everyone has underestimated the Fremen. Every single other leader has just discarded the Fremen as like backwoods. There's not very many of them. Just ignore them. Forget they exist because who cares? Except Duke Leto, which is supposed to show us that Duke Leto is such a good, open-minded leader. He's willing to entertain the idea that these, quote, backwater people will be helpful because they know the planet. They exist on the planet. He sees, hey, these guys live out in the deep desert and they don't die.
Right.
There's something to this, you guys.
Right. Just part of how he operates, how he structures his worldview is he leaves his prejudices open to recognize unrecognized value.
Right.
And he sees, oh, here's this planet that, even in the city, it is a struggle just to stay alive.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole tribe, there's this whole society that just lives out in the wilderness.
Right.
Like, what the shit? There's something going on here.
Yeah. Why have we never taken a census of them? Why do we not have satellites over these whole sections of the planet? There's something here.
They're dirty. They're smelly. They speak in, like, their own dialect. And they're all looked down upon by the more cultivated, sophisticated society.
Right.
But he's like, there's something here. And he has his trusted advisors that he outsources a lot of information gathering and decision making to.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's millions of them.
Yeah, this is fucking serious. We need to take this serious, especially Toofer, as old as he is. Which I like how we keep calling into question how capable Toofer still is. They're like, Toofer, do you need to go take a nap?
Are you slipping?
Should you go lay down for a minute? But they do meet Liette Kynes, who was the judge of the change. So we've seen him a couple times already. He's the one who took them up in the Dopter when they went to visit the spice patch. He's the one who, we get a lot of his internal monologue. You know, he will know your ways as if born to them. Because Paul is continuously, unconsciously fulfilling the prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world. And that's why Liette chooses to... Liette's not religious. Liette's not really Fremen. He has just, like, become part of their...
He's half Fremen.
He's become part of their culture.
Yeah. His father was an Imperial guy, and he married a Fremen woman.
Right. And so Liette is like, okay, well, I'm not really religious, but I'm willing to entertain the idea that there's something here. Because you keep doing shit that is uncannily like what they said you would be doing. And so I'm willing to take the chance to be on your side, even though I was tacitly told I'm on the Harkonnen side. And he rescues them, and he's going to give them coffee, and he takes them to this old research station because at one point they were trying to figure out how to terraform Arrakis, how to get more water in the system in Arrakis so that it's not so desert, so that it's an easier place to live. And he kind of gives them a little bit of a rundown on that. But then they get found. And this is when Duncan Idaho dies. So Gurney's disappeared already. Toofer's disappeared already. We see Duncan stabbed and bleeding before we shut the door. But we don't see Duncan Idaho
Actually
die. And meanwhile, we have the confrontation between Duke Leto and the Baron Harkonnen, where the Baron Harkonnen is pontificating. He's monologuing about his scheme and how great he is and how isn't it amazing that I've lorded this over you and that makes me better than you, and I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care if you're like your dad killed a bull and then got killed by a bull and you're a badass and you're like from a family of badasses and whatever. I'm the best. Can't you tell? Because I'm about to kill you and that makes me better. And the Duke's like, the tooth. Because he's so drugged up. And so he bites the tooth and he ends up killing Piter.
Right.
But he doesn't manage to kill the Baron. He just kills everybody in the room. And the Baron's like, great, now I've got to get another mentat. Which he was like, well, I was going to get one soon anyway, because Piter was a little bit too much. He was a little bit extra.
Yeah.
And so we go back to Paul. And this is kind of where part one ends, because they flee into the desert. They get a thopter. They leave Liette behind. And they take off in this thopter. And Paul has to fly into a storm in order to lose the Harkonnens. And we have been foreshadowing Paul's ability through the entire first section. And now that he is out in the desert, in the spice, he is being given spice coffee. He is being fed spice. His sleeper is awakening.
Right. I guess we've very clearly defined and explored what his current abilities are as a result of his training by his mother and by the fighters and everything. And we find out that the reason Toofer is his main teacher
is because he's been trained as a mentat.
He's also being trained as a mentat. So he's getting both so he's been getting his whole life the most sophisticated, advanced training and education in both the masculine arts and the feminine arts of the mentat school and the Bene Gesserit school.
Yeah, pure analytical
ability,
thought, and intuition, pure intuition, pure analysis.
Yeah,
those are the two sections.
The explicit analysis and deduction ability.
Yeah.
And he gets the implicit analysis and deduction. And on the Bene Gesserit side, a lot of it's more the performance, the execution.
Right.
Personally, whereas the mentat side is more logistics.
Yeah.
And logical deduction.
Right. And now that is all coming to, it's intermingling in a way it never had before. Because when he wakes up after
now we have this third ability, which was just
wakes up.
These prophetic dreams.
Right.
Every once in a while, he'd have a dream of a future event, and most of the time that future event would come to pass as it did in his dream.
Yeah.
And then he's out in the wild with the spice flowing around.
Yeah, and he's like, "Oh shit."
And he becomes untethered from time.
Yeah, he becomes anchored in the capital N now, because he sees the past and the future as all happening at once. And so it becomes the all-encompassing now. And I kind of think of it as in Interstellar, when he visits the the fourth dimension, and he's in that space that is just in infinite
the
directions.
space that's been constructed for him for Matthew McConaughey's character to explore time.
Yeah, to be able
as
to
a spatial
visualize
dimension.
time. Yeah, because he can literally see the room, his daughter's bedroom, in all directions.
And interact with it.
Past, present, future. All of it exists at once now. Sort of like old school film when it was all rolled up. Each individual image is separate, but it all exists all at the same time.
Yeah.
And he can see that now. And he can see, if I change one thing right now, I can watch as the ripples travel through time and see how that changes everything. And I can sort of extrapolate, here's 15 potential actions. Here's the 145 potential outcomes in this moment. And he's aware of absolutely everything. The amount of dust in the air, the smell, the number of grains of sand around the tent. He's just in like hyper awareness mode. And he is a little bit freaked out by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he goes from like, hey, you're a 15, 16-year-old boy. You're the son of a duke. It's going to be tough, but here's the rules of the world you live in, to your dad's dead. You might not even be human. And your mom that you thought was like the best and knew everything now seems a little bit slow to you.
Yes,
so
we've
taken away even that comfort.
As much as you've like completed and fulfilled the training that your mother gave you.
Yeah.
It's not so much that he's surpassing her abilities in the Bene Gesserit way, except for like the truth saying.
Right.
He has the full truth saying, whereas Jessica has like most of it.
Right.
She can tell when someone's lying, but Paul can infer more context behind why they're lying or what they're lying about. But it's this third leg on the tripod that Paul is growing into.
Correct. Yeah, and that's really where we leave it for part 1.
And he kind of has a mental breakdown.
He really does, because he wants to just be a normal person and cry for his dad, but he can't shut it off.
Right.
It's new, and it's like somebody turned on the tap and then broke off the handle, and he can't turn it off anymore.
And he's really concerned with the fact that his dad he just found out his dad is dead.
Yeah.
And he lost literally everything except his mother.
Right.
And he's not feeling it.
Yeah. He's like, oh shit, what does that mean?
Because of all the spice. Well, because of when you are in a crisis, a traumatic situation, your instincts and your training take over.
Yeah.
And creativity and exploration and novel insight, that all requires a psychologically safe space.
Yeah.
And it's a fragile thing, and interruptions or unforeseen problems, uncertainty, anxiety will disrupt that safe space of having the ability to do like creative thought work.
Right.
And so he's in this traumatic situation, and his training is taking over. He's absorbing information, he's processing it, and but he himself, he's kind of sitting there watching, and he's like, oh, I can feel like there's the whole Mentat training side of me, and that machine is just going full tilt. And then there's the Bene Gesserit training side, and I can't actually emotionally process what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because his training has been so comprehensive to keep him functional in a crisis.
Right.
And now he's struggling with that. It's causing him anguish that he can't process.
Anguish.
But it's not inhibiting his ability to perform in the moment.
Right.
And so he's feeling this as a kind of suffering that he doesn't have the ability right now to process his emotions.
Yeah.
And then this third thing shows up.
Yeah.
And the future unfolds to him, like the range of possible futures. And then his mom's saying stuff, and he's like, God, I just can't deal with anything else right now.
Yeah.
And so he snaps at her. And the last thing that happens at the end of part 1 is he's finally coming down from
Well, they disappear into the storm. That's the end of part 1. They fly off after they meet Liette, and they disappear into the storm. And they're believed dead, but they don't find their bodies.
No, I just pulled up part 2 and looked at the pages immediately before that.
Okay.
So book 2, Muad'Dib.
Yeah.
And so this is where he's like, I can't turn any of this off right now, Mom, and you're trying to comfort me, but you have no idea what I'm experiencing.
Right.
Like, for anybody else, Jessica would actually have a good idea of what somebody else is experiencing and how to help them through it emotionally, psychologically. But one, he can see everything she's trying to do to manipulate him, which she's trying to manipulate him in a like healthy psychological path back to a feeling of safety. But he can see all of that. Plus he's seeing all this other stuff and making all these conclusions. He's getting all the future sight. But then his Mentat and Bene Gesserit training analysis machines are churning through that huge amount of information and just feeding him conclusions, feeding him data and insights and facts about the future. And so I think this is when he tells her that, oh yeah, you're actually a Harkonnen. And he realizes, yep, you'll acquire the blue eyes and a callus beside your lovely nose from the filter tube to your still suit, and you'll bear my sister, Saint Alia of the Knife.
I know. Fuck, I love Alia.
And so he's working through this whole traumatic experience and like awakening of his third eye.
Yeah.
And
his private eye.
And this is where he first sees the almost inevitability of the jihad of the Fremen.
I didn't realize how prevalent the jihad is in the book. Because I think the only adaptation I've seen that mentions it at all is the sci-fi adaptation. Mm-hmm. And that's
because it covers the next 2 books.
Right.
Which, that's kind of the whole plot.
Yeah, this is the first taste we have of the fact that his actions on this planet to save himself and to save his house will tear apart the universe at its seams.
And he can see like one path. All the paths point to jihad.
Yeah.
But there's a tiny glimmer of a possible path through this that does not result in jihad.
Yeah.
And that, as soon as he realizes how likely the jihad is, he's like, I don't want to do that. He says, surely I cannot choose that way.
Yeah.
Even though it's like all of the paths lead there.
Yes.
And then Jessica says the Fremen will give us sanctuary because he's spouting all this stuff and she can't quite keep up.
Right, because he's having like a disassociative event where he's like just saying things out loud as they assault him. You know, we're going to be with the Fremen. You're going to be with the Fremen. We're going to be with them so long. We literally become part of them. They're going to give us shelter. You're going to have my daughter. You're going to have my sister with them. And just like on and on and on. And Jessica's like, hang on, what? The Fremen are going to take us? And he's like, why are you not getting this?
He says, that's one of the ways. Yes, they'll call me Muad'Dib, the one who points the way. Yes, that's what they'll call me. And he closed his eyes, thinking, "Now, my father, I can mourn you." And he felt tears coursing down his cheeks. And that's the end of part 1.
Yeah. Yeah. What a lot happened in the first part. And I'm glad we're splitting this up because we're at almost 2 hours.
Just on part 1.
Just on part 1. I mean, part 1 is the most dense. It has the most political maneuvering. It has the most
exposition.
It was responsible for getting us in the world, establishing all the power players, establishing the level of complexity that we were going to be dealing with for the rest of the book. And it had all of that on its shoulders. And that way,
and it really adequately justifies everything that happens.
Right.
So that when you get to later in the book and you're like, why are these people just wandering around in the desert with this like nomadic group? What's happened? Why are we fighting so hard for the spice?
Yeah.
Why is this all happening?
Right.
That's all been, the foundation has been laid thick
and heavy.
And heavy.
Yeah.
And with reinforcement, and it's been allowed to cure in place.
Yeah.
And we have a solid ground upon which we can build the rest of the story.
It is usul, which is the strength at the base of the pillar. Yeah, I mean, it had a lot. It had to do a lot because
and it executed really well.
Because he needed to be free in part 2 and 3 to just move you through the story without having to explain shit anymore. If you didn't get it in the first part, I hope go back and read it again. Sorry, go back, read it again, because from here on out, it's just he's pushing the gas pedal to the floor and it's go. We are done reading the signs. We are done reading the map. We are done planning the trip. And now it's time to go.
And now the whole feel of the book shifts.
Yeah, it really changes in Muad'Dib because it's there was a feeling of inevitability. Everything in the first section felt inevitable. I think that's why he gives us all the information. He tells us who the bad guy is. He tells us who the traitor is. He enumerates all of the parts of the plan because the first part had to feel unavoidable. It had to feel like this was the fruition of so many different political maneuverings. There was absolutely no way to avoid this outcome. And then we, in the second part and third part, are to feel as unsure of what will happen as Paul is. Because Paul is continuously trying to plumb the future to figure out where he's going. And sometimes he can do that and sometimes he can't. And so he wanted the reader to feel that way too. Sometimes you know where you're going. Sometimes you don't know how this is going to turn out. We know ultimately he's going to win because Princess Irulan has told us that multiple times in the beginning of every chapter. But we don't know how he's going to get there. It's the uncertainty of how he's going to get there that creates that feeling, more tension, more narrative tension in the second and third parts.
Right. And I think the tension in the next parts of the book are more what we know what his final outcome is going to be roughly.
Right.
And the question is, what is he going to have to do? What is he going to have to compromise on? What is he going to have to sacrifice to get there?
Yeah. Yep. And that's where we leave it for part 1. And I think that's where we should leave it for part 1.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Sounds good. So do you want to have the same sign off on our deep cuts?
I don't know. No, we should come up with something different.
We'll be back for our next episode, which will be part 2 of the first book in the Dune series, which canonically is the first 6 that were written by Frank, and I think maybe the last one was written by Brian. Or he wrote 5, there was intended to be 6, and he died before he finished. We're reading the first 3, and we're first talking about the first book. So we read Dune. This was Dune part 1. We will be back. Our next episode will be about Dune part 2. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Until next time, friends.
Bye.
Bye.